All right, welcome to a special edition of Phantology Podcast. This is going to be an entry in our series of The Author's Voice. I am Stephen, your host, and I have Josh with me this morning.
Hey, happy to be here.
And we are joined by our author. So this is someone that actually writes books and doesn't just fanboy about them like we do. So we have Lal Din from London. You're over across the Atlantic, right?
I'm in Manchester actually. So, but yeah.
Okay. Shows my knowledge of European geography there. Yeah, so Anna, tell us about yourself a little bit and tell us why you're here.
I am a Danish Pakistani with Indian heritage. I'm the youngest out of four girls, and I was born and raised in Denmark. But I moved to England in 2019 to study English literature. And yeah, that's pretty much it about me.
Okay, and tell us a little bit about your exciting book, Descent of the Drowned.
Yeah, The Descent of the Drowned is a YA fantasy set in a colonized Indo-Persian world where society is divided into a caste system. And it's about these two characters, Levi and Roma, who are both from very toxic environments, and they want to break out of these environments. And Levi's father is obsessed with magic, and he's looking for a treasure that's dangerous, and Levi and Roma are mysteriously connected to this treasure.
And this is the first in a series that you've planned. That was the vibe that I got. Josh and I both finished reading the first book, and that was a question I had for you actually. Like, how much more should we expect?
It's a trilogy, so
Okay.
definitely 3 books. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I would hope after the end of that book, I finished it last night. I'm like, there better be more after this. This is not going to be a spoiler podcast, but definitely the end leaves you wanting to find out what happens next.
Yeah. When I wrote the ending, I was thinking about, should I leave it so that people want the second book, or should I just end it? And then, because it's really just about whether people are interested in reading another book in the series. So yeah.
So the first book, Descent of the Drowned, comes out on March 15th, which, as we are recording this, is in a couple days from now, this coming Monday. Tell us about your excitement level for the release. What are some emotions right now?
I think the strongest emotion is fear and anxiety. Lots of fear and anxiety. So that right now, that's what I'm feeling the most. But I'm hoping that once the book releases and reviews start coming in, and that I will relax a little bit more and just kind of enjoy the process and be a little bit more excited about it.
Yeah. Well, my 30-second review is, I think it was great. I really enjoyed reading it, and I think that I think it's gonna be positively reviewed. And so hopefully that calms your nerves a little bit. That's just coming from one person. But honestly, like we were chatting before the show, if I ever had a work that was this high quality, I would be super excited to release it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and especially as your first published work, right? Like this is some good stuff, and so congratulations on achieving what I'm sure has been a long dream, right?
Thank you. It's actually my first time trying out fantasy, so yeah, I hope it goes well.
So tell us a little bit about like your history with the fantasy genre. Have you is that what you preferred to read throughout your life? I know you said you're studying like literature. What's been your history with fantasy as a genre?
I actually used to write horror, and I was a child back then, but I really loved this one series called Goosebumps.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I read this as a kid.
And they were my favorite series, and so I started out writing scary stories because I really like Goosebumps. And then eventually, when I hit my teens, I started writing paranormal. I think at the time that genre was very popular. There were a lot of paranormal stories, and but I was always a little bit intimidated by fantasy. I think it's such a complex genre, and it takes a lot of skill
Yeah,
to write.
yeah, it does.
So I just was too afraid to try it out. But yeah, I ended up writing a fantasy book. So yeah.
Nice. And tell us a little bit more about the inspiration for Descent of the Drowned. I know it gets into your heritage and some like fairly personal, I think, themes from your life, right?
Yeah. Um, there were actually two aspects when it comes to what inspired me. The first one was social, cultural, and political issues from places like South Asia and the Middle East and ancient Arabia. Um, and some of those issues were things like caste system and sacred prostitution, ethnic persecution, um, but also pre-Islamic Arabian mythology was something that really fascinated me, particularly because of the kind of society that it existed in. Um, and so those were like the primary inspirational sources for me. And then, of course, I have certain personal experiences and a background that's linked to some of those issues like caste system. I come from a culture where caste system exists, and growing up, I was asked about my caste, and um, so I have seen it up close as well with how lower caste people are treated. Whenever I visited Pakistan and I would see lower caste people, there were certain rules that applied, such as not drinking from a glass that a lower caste person has touched, or things like that. So that kind of stuck with me, and I wanted to talk about these issues in this book.
Yeah, the book definitely takes a pretty unflinching look at the caste system. I feel like sometimes with fantasy we get maybe watered down caste systems where it almost seems more of just like a way to build the world or something
Yeah.
than it does than it would than it's like an actual representation of it. And that was it was a good, I don't know how, like it was a very unflinching look at it, and I appreciated that perspective.
Yeah, like you said, there's a lot of very serious and heavy topics in the book, and it's billed as I think a hashtag own voices book, right? Which actually, maybe for those who don't know, who are listening, what is that? What does that mean in writing?
Own voices is basically marginalized or underrepresented voices. So, for instance, South Asian voices, or people with mental illnesses, or
Mm-hmm.
people who come from a caste system is also own voices. So it's linked to your personal experiences, but particularly underrepresented narratives.
And then the very obvious benefit that I see from this is that you have people writing about things that they have experienced directly, so the representation is going to be so much stronger. We like this is a much more accurate look, as if if I tried to write the same story, I would not do a very good job. So I think that is a big plus for Descent of the Drowned. Like that personal tie-in that you have makes it really powerful.
Mm-hmm. And you can really see that, I think, in the characters in the book. Is there's so much dimension to them, and so much, like, they're not just stripped down to one or two characteristics, but they're really well defined and have a lot of complex motivations, and more than just like wanting to save the day or go and and help people. It's like they have they're influenced a lot by their experiences that they've had and by the systems in which they operate.
Yeah, that was one of the things that were most important to me. It was the complexity of the characters and just the psychological and emotional aspects of their characters that I really wanted to portray as realistic as possible.
So with some of these heavier topics, was that difficult to write about? I'm assuming to some extent it was. Maybe to us, some extent it wasn't, because you obviously had a strong desire to kind of get these things out there. But I imagine, it also might be tough to try to appropriately handle some of these things. And so I'm sure that was something you wrestled with.
Definitely. I mean, a lot of research went behind writing this book, but it took time learning and understanding certain aspects of our world, such as human trafficking. And also it took time processing that grim reality and processing the stories that I stumbled across, because some of them were very harrowing and disturbing. But the most difficult part, like you said, it's that fear of failing the marginalized voices that I wanted to represent, which is why I spent a lot of time exploring the repercussions of sexual assault, for instance, because I didn't want to treat those subjects lightly. I didn't want it to sugarcoat things, but I also didn't want to indulge them for shock value. I kind of wanted a straightforward, honest depiction of these issues.
You can definitely see the impact that those things have had on the characters, and how it's really it deeply affects their whole character and your understanding of the character. And so I think you did a really good job with that.
Thank you.
And I don't want to paint the picture that this is a super dark book. I mean, there are some very serious aspects to it, and explore some darker themes, but there are also, kind of these rays of hope, where there's some positivity on human nature as well. It's not, I mean, there is a big movement in fantasy right now to have this like super hyper realistic grimdark style. But how do you balance the positive as well?
I think by showing that the characters aren't willing to give up, no matter how badly or how many awful experiences happen to them. They constantly find something to fight for, whether it's their own freedom or whether it's people they care about, whether it's wanting to change to become a better person, wanting to change the circumstances of other people. So I think they find hope in the kind of people that surround them, and also within themselves, because they want more. They don't want to just give up and just accept the way things are. But I think while I wanted the story to be dark in the sense that I want it to be honest about these issues, like what does it look like when you have human trafficking or trade. I also wanted to emphasize the good things about this society. So relationships between people you care about, or some really nice things about the culture, such as some of their things like clothes and music and food, and the festival where people kind of come together to celebrate. Things like that are good things that reaffirm human life and reaffirm good relationships and things like that. So it's not all dark. There are glimpses of good human experiences scattered in between all the dark stuff.
And I think that was one of the best parts of the book for me, was this like world that you have built out. It feels like a world that you could go live in. And I mean, I think a lot of that is because it is such based on your experiences and your lived experiences, and so different from mine. So I feel like I'm being exposed to this whole world, and I think that this book did a really good job in that. And so I think that's a combination of just good world, like well done world building on your part, but also like we've been talking about, the fact that it's stemming from these lived experiences of yours.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's I would say it's in the speculative fiction realm where it's really based on a lot of real world experiences. It's kind of like a couple series that we just recently read, The Poppy War and the Burning series by Evan Winter. Both are based off of um, I guess those would both qualify as own voices books as well, because they're based off of underrepresented cultural backgrounds. So awesome. Yeah, we're really becoming more diverse, I guess, in recent days.
Yeah, definitely.
Good. So going back to the characters that you mentioned, I thought one character that really kind of represented this like continually wanting to try to become a better person, despite the uh, poor decisions in the past, or maybe just despite the circumstances that he found himself in. I thought Leviathan was really kind of embodied that, and we're not going to do spoilers for what actually happens, but out of these two characters, Roma and Levi, like how did you draw inspiration for them?
For Roma, I really wanted to represent a marginalized voice, and because I was at the time I had stumbled across something called the Devadasi system in India, which is sacred prostitution or temple prostitution, and I just really wanted the female protagonist to be from this particular system because I wanted to illustrate the kind of life that they live and the grim reality of child prostitution basically, but also demonstrate how religion can be used to brainwash and control people, or trap them in a particular system that that they're too afraid to break out of. um, with Levi, I wanted to explore um, a highly sensitive child who's taken from a safe environment and put in a military city where he survives by becoming a brutal soldier. And I didn't really want to write a hero. I wanted to write a human being who makes really bad choices and continues to make really bad choices at times, and is rejected by his own people for his actions. So a character with an unstable self-image and this belief that he's not worthy or capable of redemption, and so why even bother trying? And then again, at other times, he's suddenly willing to try really hard. So that constant switch between um, how he has been raised and the kind of cynical view he has on the world, on himself, but still a part of him always wants to be better.
I was snooping on your Twitter a little bit, and I think you said something about the inspiration for the mental state that you just described for Levi. Is that was I onto something there? There was some kind of a name to this, I think, that you gave.
Um, oh, was it the Dark Triad?
Yes.
Yeah, that's for Levi's father. His
Oh,
the yeah the antagonist, or the tyrant,
okay.
the moral tyrant of the story world.
Little bit different. Okay, that's my bad. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah. His father is. I based him on partly on the Dark Triad, which is a psychological model which consists of these three traits: Machiavellianism and narcissism and psychopathy. And these three traits are generally considered evil of a sort. Um, and that's why they're called the Dark Triad. But yeah, I based his character on that model. And a lot of his behavior and his speech and the way that he manipulates people or watches them and kind of determines their strengths and weaknesses, all of those aspects of his character are related to that model.
Yeah. That character specifically had like a weight whenever he was on screen or on page. Like you could just feel that there's like some heavy implications, and like
Yeah, yeah.
you weren't quite sure what was going to happen, you know, because you did a really good job in building up the character before we spent a lot of time with him. And whenever he was there, I just felt creeped out.
Yeah, I really didn't want to build a caricature of a villain, so not just have a character that is considered psychopath in the way that people usually use the word, you know, kind of in a way that makes a person seem crazy, or you know, in that sense. I actually wanted to take a neurological condition like psychopathy and then build this character around that.
And you could also see, because I mean, I think Levi would be generally classified as like a protagonist in the book, but you can see how these traits from his father kind of work into his character as well. And not that he has like every one of those traits, but you can see him struggling against kind of these things that would naturally be instilled in him, and that have been instilled in him through his experiences kind of before the book started. But
Yeah, I that was also very intentional. I kind of wanted to um, have like this parallel between Levi and his father, but also a contrast. So they have certain traits that are similar, and yet there are also things that set them apart. And I think one of the most predominant traits that set them apart is probably that Levi has a conscience, or he's able to feel things like shame and guilt and empathy if he allows himself to. But his father he lacks those emotions completely. He's not capable of feeling them at all.
yeah, one of the most impactful moments of the book for me, and I want to do this, and it's not like a huge plot shaping moment, but I'm gonna still try and keep it spoiler free. Um, is Levi kill someone, and it's just kind of like what would typically be seen as like, you know, taking out like a little character that needed to happen, and then he finds out that that person had a family, and then he has to like wrestle with like the fact that he just like took away somebody's like father and husband. And I think that's something that's like not really addressed too much in fantasy, is you get these protagonists just kind of like taking out a guard on a tower, or taking out like so and so that just kind of needs to move the plot forward. But like that person might have you know, probably does have people that depend on them. And so the fact that you took the time to kind of address how that's going to affect the protagonist and affect his like psyche and mental health was impressive to me.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite things is the interactions between Roma and Levi when those happen. Again, I don't want to do spoilers, like Josh said, but I think that sometimes these interactions are maybe a little bit like in other books, maybe they're a little bit cheesy, where it's like, oh, the characters are coming together, and of course they just like understand each other so perfectly because they're the main characters, and of course, and like the plot's got to move them along, so here they go, they're best friends now. But I thought the interactions between Roma and Levi, when they happened, made a lot of sense for the characters that you had built up, and they, you know, they weren't exactly super happy, and
Well, okay.
and yeah, Josh.
So one thing I was worried about as I was reading like kind of the first half of this book is you know, it's billed as like a YA book, and I like YA books, but that's not like what I read a lot of. But one of the things I don't love about YA books is insta love, where like two characters just kind of see each other and then fall in
Yeah.
love. And I was
Yep.
really throughout the first half of the book, I was like, I really don't want this to be an insta love story where like these two characters just like see each other and they're now in love.
Yes.
And so I guess this is kind of a spoiler, but that doesn't happen, you know, where
Yes.
they're, and so I was relieved about that, because I was like, dang, that would really kind of undo a lot of the character growth in both of these characters if that
Yeah.
were to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I had the same thought when I started out writing this story. I was like, people are going to expect that these two characters are gonna fall in love. And one of the reasons I decided not to have that is, well, it's something that people expect. So what's the fun in writing something that everybody already knows is gonna happen? But also in terms of the characters, it just didn't make sense to me that they would fall in love with each other, because they are, first of all, they are so traumatized, and they have so many things that they're dealing with. So they're not in a headspace where they could actually develop these kind of emotions for each other. But also they need very different things. And any kind of relationship between them would, I believe, be very, very toxic and very unhealthy. And so I had to really look at the characters and be like, would this really make sense? Would they be good for each other? And the answer was that where they are right now, no, they won't be. And so I decided not to write a romance between them. Um,
And I guess we'll leave it vague as to if they do develop a romance later on. Maybe
yeah,
it's on the table, maybe not. If you
we
want
don't
to
know.
know, read the book and find out.
Because what I will say is they're both very well developed, and I could see myself shipping them. I was just like hoping that they don't just see each other and then fall in love, because that would not be, that's just like the opposite of where each character was going. It's like they were,
Yeah,
yeah. So
yeah. At least not in the first book, but we don't know what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, tell us a little bit more about the inspiration from religion and mythology. We talked about some of the cultural inspirations, but tell us more about the the else portion of the setting.
So I drew from pre-Islamic Arabian mythology, and there were about 360 gods and goddesses that they worshipped back then. And mostly the gods or the mythology, just the faith, was used to cultivate things like temple prostitution, or putting the fear of God in people and controlling them. Um, but I was mostly interested in how they were used to control people. So I drew a lot from that part of the mythology in how it functioned in that society. But I also drew from Islamic accounts, in terms of, for instance, Levi's father is called the Pharaoh, and in the story of Moses, in the Islamic account of Moses, the Pharaoh is also called the Pharaoh. And I like the parallel between how both characters, or the Pharaoh and the Pharaoh in my story, consider themselves a god. And so I decided to use that term and use that particular story also in terms of how Moses' people were persecuted by the Pharaoh, or the Pharaoh. And the same thing kind of happens in this story where the Pharaoh persecutes the clans. And I like that kind of, I like taking little things from different faiths and kind of twisting and tweaking them and creating these parallels. And I like the symbolism of it, so to speak. But also, I think the magical creatures in this book, yeah, they are inspired by jinn, angels, and demons. So I basically took those ideas, but I decided to tweak them and make them a little bit different, because I see a lot of stories these days about jinn, and so and also angels and demons, and I didn't just want to, copy paste those particular creatures into my own story. I still wanted it to be my creatures in a way.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where I drew the inspiration from.
And there's some magic. It's a fantasy book. Typically, we expect some magic.
Yeah.
It is still, I guess, somewhat of a mystery for me, having finished the book. Like there are definitely some things that are explained a little more than others. So that's something that I'm looking forward to learning more about. Like what exactly is going on here with the magic? How does it work more, and how does it work more into the to the plot going forward? So yeah.
Yeah, the magic system was also something that I struggled with a lot in the start because I had read a lot of YA fantasy where, the magical source is a book, or it's, powers that people can embody, like bending the elements or making objects move with your mind. And what was difficult for me was that it didn't quite fit into the story world I had built, because my story world was a reflection of the real world. And so I needed the magic or the magic system to kind of be the same, like grounded in something.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the initial idea was, okay, what can I do? Because, everything has been used before. And so it's not like you can build something original anymore. But I just thought, the story world is about colonization as well. So people have invaded this country, and they have invaded it for a reason. And so my thought was, why do countries invade other countries? And it was like, oh, for resources. So what is the most desired resource in our world? And a few answers popped up, but the one that stuck with me was oil. And so I thought, okay, so what if magic in the story world is like oil? It's a substance that nature provides that exists within the earth that you
Hmm.
can then draw out and tie to different components like chemicals or medicine. And then thereby you can enhance the ability of that component. So that's kind of where it started. But like it's a little bit more, there's more, but yeah, it's explored in the sequel, and we kind of get a few more answers. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And you also have some um, almost like shamanic, there's some, harnessing of powers from the gods as well that's coming in. At least that's how I read it. I hope I was interpreting that right.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a liturgical language. So this part of the magic system is more tied to a specific ancient language that can be used to create magic seals or bind these magical creatures to your service, for instance. But it's a darker part of a magic system that people use for black magic or blood sacrifices and things like that. So it's a little bit different from the other part of the system, but yeah, it's also magical. So.
Nice. Um, so the other thing we kind of wanted to talk to you about was the process of writing the book, and I know that this is your first time publishing. Am I correct in that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you walk us through like um, the broad strokes, what the process was like?
Yeah. So I think the querying process was the most difficult part, because a lot of the agents that rejected the book did it because there were too many hard issues, and because it didn't follow the YA fantasy formula completely.
Mm.
So it was kind of a risk that no one really wanted to take, obviously, because the publishing industry is a business, and profit is what matters. So they had to look at whether this book would be a commercial success. And I knew from the start that this was not a commercial story. It didn't follow the YA fantasy formula, which is what people really enjoy. It's that fast-paced, plot-driven story with, lots of romance and magic and all of those things. And so, yeah, but so it was like I had to kind of decide whether I wanted to go with the agents that were interested and reshape the book into a commercial story, or if I wanted to take a different path and, have to fight really hard for this book to be seen and, find a place for it in the market. And I decided, obviously, to take a different path because what was important to me was that I could stand by this book and this story, and that I wasn't just writing for the market just to kind of sell a book and do well, but also my goal was to spread awareness, and so that was my focus. I needed I needed the story um, to be true to the characters and the voices that I was representing.
And so through all that, so I mean, props, absolutely, props for writing, your story, and I think that really shines through in the narrative. Like that is the strongest selling point to read the book. Ironically, like you're saying, the publishers were worried about trying to make a profit, but our opinion is that that's the reason why you should read the story, because it's got that strong personal connection.
Yeah, and those risks I feel like paid off, because you're right. I could totally see a publisher wanting you to rework the characters a little bit and have them meet and fall in love, and that I could see that driving a little bit more sales in the YA industry if you can put, two good-looking people on the cover, like embraced in some, I don't want to
maybe
like
one of them should be shirtless or
yeah,
something.
yeah, exactly. So I don't want to like rag too much on YA books, because I like there's totally a place for that, right? But like that's not what this book was, and I feel like if it would have turned into that, then it would have been a disservice to what this book was, because I can already go out and read, hundreds of those books if I want to, but I haven't really come across a book that respects their characters so much in a way that that this book does, and so yeah, I'm glad that you kept it the way that you did.
Thank you. I'm glad I did it too.
And although I guess we're classifying this as YA, there's a lot of more adult themes as well. So I think it is something that appeals to a wide range of audiences.
Yeah. Personally, this is one that I would want, like, I don't know, like an older youth, maybe like a 16, 17-year-old to read, as opposed to like a 10 to 12-year-old. I think that might be, there's some themes that are pretty heavy in this book that would be harder for younger audiences to read.
Yeah, definitely. It was difficult to categorize this book because I would have probably gone with YA crossover, because I feel like, again, like you said, it's older teens and then kind of crosses over into adult theme or adult people. But there wasn't really a category called crossover, or it was really difficult to kind of place it, because obviously I really wanted to spread awareness among younger minds, and I also wanted this book to reach across to adults, because it obviously has very strong themes and heavy themes. So yeah, I kind of wish there was a more specific category for this type of story, but maybe in the future.
I mean, the weird thing is young adult feels like, if you're just to like take all the context out of it, young adult to me would be like 18 to 25. That's like what in my head I would characterize as like a young adult, right?
Yeah.
But young adult in like the publishing industry feels like a 12 to 18-year-old, and
Exactly.
that's like not what I see a young adult as. That's like what I would see it. I don't know what exactly you would call that, but like it's interesting, because I feel like that's more the age group that I think that this book would be really impactful for, is like 18 to 25, somewhere in there, where they've, a lot of the, where you're dealing with that kind of trauma and recognizing that you might have had things that happen to you in your youth that are going to kind of mess you up if you don't deal with them and recognize them.
Yeah.
Um,
So Anna, what was your favorite part about writing the book?
Um, the all of the emotional scenes where the characters are struggling with whether it's internal demons or external demons. I really enjoy that, and especially symbolism. It's my favorite thing about writing. Like literary devices for me is all about symbolism and parallels and contrasts and foreshadowing. All of that. It's what I enjoy the most, and that's why this book is packed with it because I just I love it. So yeah, that's my favorite part.
There were definitely some times while I was reading where I was thinking, this isn't like a typical action-packed fantasy book. This is almost like I'm revisiting something from my AP English class back in high school, where there's all of these different like symbols and devices that I'm having to keep track of. And that was kind of fun to go back to those days and try to like do more of a deep analysis of what I was reading.
yeah, I feel like this book would be great for a reread because I think you could pick up on a few more of those things and take the time to be like, okay, I know where the plot is going, but now I really want to sit back and take a deeper dive into the more complexities and the literary elements that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's also what I enjoy the most when I read fantasy. It's when I'm able to um, kind of analyze different things and draw out the like understand the symbolism and kind of catch the foreshadowing a little bit too, so you can maybe you read the book once and then you're like, I missed something, and then you go back and then you can kind of see the clues in the text. I really like that. I feel like it's a great experience in terms of reading. Um, you're engaging with the text and it gives you something.
So I know the writing process is not always easy. What was the most difficult part for you?
The writing process itself is very difficult um, because, well, obviously English is not my first language. So that in itself has been a struggle to kind of expand my vocabulary and, um, just gaining knowledge about how to write a decent book. It's just basically a decent book. So that
Well,
part.
you said obviously English isn't your first language. And
Yeah.
I would not have guessed that, both from like this interview and also from reading the book. I would not have guessed that English was not your first language. So
Okay,
Yeah,
so I
I want
agree
to
with.
add to that because I think one of the strongest parts of the book is the prose. Like it's very well written and it reads very easily. So I really enjoyed that.
Wow, thank you. That makes me feel very accomplished. Um, but yeah, it was a difficult process writing. And I think I struggled the most with specific technical parts like the pacing. I feel like I there's so much room for improvement for me in terms of pacing. So there are certain things that I struggle with technically. I feel like I'm much better at the character development part or the emotional scenes and dialogue. Those are kind of like where I feel confident. But the writing itself is always very difficult for me. Also because um, I have a mental illness, and when I'm writing, it's an obstacle for me. So I don't really I have to kind of struggle with that alongside just writing in English. So yeah.
So do you have any advice that you would give to other aspiring first-time authors?
Um, yeah, advice. I would advise read all kinds of books from all kinds of genres. Don't stick to one genre. You want to read all kinds of books because it expands. Doesn't just expand your vocabulary, but it really helps you experimenting with writing styles once you start writing.
Hmm.
Um, but also, I think the most important part would be to make sure that you write a book that you can stand by 100% with or without a publishing house behind you.
Okay, so tell us how the sequel is going.
Um, it's going well. I have a few chapters I need to write, but the book is mostly written, and I'm in the
Oh,
middle of,
that sounds like that's going very well.
yeah. Yeah, but I am a little bit stuck with the revising of the book. But yeah, I have a very clear vision, and I'm hoping to meet my deadline, which is this summer, and then and then it's ready for an editor. So yeah, it's going well.
So real quick, what's that process like? Say you've gotten your first draft written, and because I know there's a lot of people that listen to our podcast that are kind of in that boat of they've never really put in pen to paper, but they might want to eventually try writing. So what's that process like where you've maybe gotten a first draft done? What happens next?
Then I start on the second draft, and I personally I write. I edit a lot as I go, because I am incapable of moving forward unless I am happy with what I've written. So I spend a lot of time editing as I go. My first draft reads a lot more like a second or third draft because of how much editing I do while I'm writing. And I think it's different from author to author. I've heard of authors saying that their first draft is really, really rough, and they write maybe 6, 7 drafts before they're ready for professional editing. But for me, I can't write a really, really rough draft. I simply have to edit as I go. So yeah, I think I write maybe 3 drafts tops before I start the professional editing process.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so what happens when you send it off to the editor? They go over it. They make any like tweaks or edits that they want to make and send it back.
Yeah, so there are different stages of editing, and the first is usually the structural part. So they'll go over the structure of the story, everything from pacing to plot holes to all of that. Um, and the second stage is more where they look at the writing itself, so flow and sentence structures, if anything's clunky or if there's a lot of info dumping, the exposition, things like that. And then there's 2 more processes, which is more technical, like in the terms of grammatical. So they look at the grammar and they make sure that everything is neat and, without any mistakes, because we don't want that in a published book. So yeah.
Fantastic. Is there anything else, Anna, that you would like readers to know going into reading Descent of the Drowned?
I think just read the trigger warnings before you decide to read this book. That's really important, especially if you don't have that great of a mental health at the moment. So it's important that you make sure that you are mentally healthy, because there's a lot of stuff in this book that is dark and difficult to deal with. And also, I'm just really grateful for all the support I have received so far from readers. It's been really great and amazing. And I see and hear every one of you. So, yeah, thank you so much. And also, thank you so much to Fantology for having me on your podcast. That I think is the most important part that I want to say. It's been really great, and I'm so grateful that you guys decided to have me.
Well, yeah, thank you for coming on. It's an honor for us, and this was a little bit of a unique experience because we haven't done too many author interviews. So as I was reading this book, I was like, I get to talk to this person in a few days, and it was great.
Yeah, that is kind of a cool, different. I guess we don't usually get to talk to the Brandon Sandersons of the world, so this was fun to.
I am definitely not anywhere near Sanderson. He is like a completely different level, but thank you so much for thinking of me that way.
So if you are interested in reading Descent of the Drowned, you can pre-order now. But actually, I think this episode's going to come out on release day, so don't even pre-order, just do the regular ordering. And how can they do that? Just Barnes & Noble, Amazon? Is there any preferred outlets?
No, any store is fine. Whatever is easiest for the customers to buy from. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Anna, for coming on and for taking the time out of your day to do this with us. It was a pleasure.
No, thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Phantology. If you'd like to let us know your opinions on all things sci-fi and fantasy, join our Discord. Invites are in the episode descriptions below. If you'd like to support the show, like these fine folks here, you can do that at patreon.com/phantology_books. Patrons get early access to new episodes, exclusive postings, and exclusive Discord benefits. But of course, just listening and watching and sharing with your friends and family is support enough. Journey before destination all.